Hello guys, and welcome to a new Steel Division video today by me, Vulcan. Today I have for you the battle group overview for the Festung Groß-Paris, and in this one I'm going to be talking through all of the different units and how I feel they should fit into this division and the choices that I make. If you guys have any differing opinions or any different setups for your divisions, feel free to chuck them into the comments and I'll go through them. And I'm sure other people will be willing to discuss those changes with you. There's always a lot of differing opinions on how the battle group should be laid out, and that's, I think, very healthy for the community, so make sure you get involved. Also, if you want to check out my other battle group videos, there is a link in the description, but without further ado, let's jump into the Recon tab. So, first of all, we're starting with the Aufklärer. The Aufklärer are your standard two-man recon squad. You want to keep them hidden for the majority of the game if you can, put them on return fire so they don't even use their MP40s if something comes close. Also, you don't want them to maybe throw grenades at 50 meters. Generally, if a unit gets that close, though, they're probably spotted by then and then probably dead. But yeah, in most cases, you just want to keep them as hidden as possible for as long as possible so that they can provide you information for the entire game. The beauty of the Festung Groß-Paris, however, is that the Aufklärer come in the Panzer MG, and this is a machine gun vehicle, like an armoured car, with 3 front armour, which is a little bit more than your standard like half-track that would accompany an Aufklärer or something normally, and that makes it very useful for sort of early game fire support versus infantry, and it's pretty hard to remove. So this Panzer MG can be really, really useful, and that's why I bring in both of them early on. Also, you know, 35 points for recon in the early game isn't too bad. Furthermore, it's the only infantry recon you can get in Phase A, so that would be another reason to take it anyway. You can get the BMW R75s in Phase A, but these units are just not very good. They ideally need like an optics buff or something in order to make them useful, because at the moment I feel like they just get killed too easily by enemy machine guns and so on. So like arms fire can kill these very easily. Yes, they're very fast, but there's other things that are faster now, like the traction car that brings in the FFI units, for example. So these aren't even the fastest units anymore. Either way, moving on, we have the SPW204 available, and this is the Panhard, just reclassified for German use. And it does have the decent rate of fire main gun with 5 AP, which is perfect for destroying enemy half-tracks and light armoured vehicles early on in the game. It also has that 3 front armour, which means that it is okay. But the issue with the SPW204 compared to when you can get it in the FFI, for example, is that it does cost a little bit more in this division. So I think that kind of puts me off bringing it in, when otherwise it would be useful to clean up light armoured vehicles early on. But why would you need an SPW204 when you can get yourself a 2-star Puma? And this is your 10 AP sniper, I guess, in Phase A. You don't really want to get it in like a main battle tank engagement, like with like an M4 or something like that, because that will penetrate the front armor quite easily. But it can be, again, used for cleaning up light armored vehicles. It can get pretty accurate with 3-star veterancy. So yeah, it's definitely a good sort of unit for taking on light armor early on. Then finally, in Phase B, you can get Speertroop in the 251, and this is a pretty standard setup. 2-star veterancy is actually really nice. It gives you quite a lethal half-track. That machine gun does start to do a lot of damage when it gets high veterancy. So yeah, both of these together are very nice at 2-star veterancy, and I just bring 1 card of those in Phase B, since I bring 2 cards of Aufklärer in Phase A. And that's pretty much your lot. Now, what you probably could do is maybe sacrifice some more Aufklärer in Phase A for more Speertroop in Phase B, but honestly, I think it's worth having the extra Aufklärer in Phase A so you can get them into positions early on, rather than relying on Speertroop later on, which often people tend to use as more combat infantry than they probably should. And I think for myself, it definitely removes the temptation of using a 2-star speed troop squad as an MG to support my infantry, because it often leads to them getting killed, and therefore you end up blind by phase C, for example. So I think the preservation of recon infantry in this division is relatively important, and that's why 2-star or 2 strength squads work a little better, because they can remain hidden for longer. So that's kind of my logic behind the recon tab. Let's move on to the infantry tab. Now, the infantry tab is probably one of the most interesting tabs in this division. There is a lot of different types of units to talk about. Let's start off in phase A with the Landeschützen. These guys have 10 Kar-98s. They have the MP40, so that makes them very similar to Ersatztruppen. But one thing I would say is that the main difference here is they're not disheartened. So they have, I think, 1 more HE than Ersatz. They're not disheartened, and that makes them cost 5 points more. But the beauty is they're just a great frontline infantry for just running into the enemy and sort of sponging damage for you, so you can use your other sort of support units to take out those enemy units. So that's the beauty of the Landeschützen. And I actually take 2 cards of those in phase A, which gives you a total of 10, which is a lot of dudes to work with early on in the game. And for the 15 points apiece, well, you can bring in a lot every phase, right? You can bring in 5, I think it is, every minute, which is a lot of infantry to have access to. So that's one thing that you can do with the Festung very early on, is just get all of that infantry in. Now, another choice in phase A is the Grenführer. These guys are your standard command infantry squad. They have the 6 HE on their MP40s, and they've got a couple of Kar-98s. The main thing that makes these useful is their smoke grenade for the utility. Of course, they are command as well, so they provide the extra command stars to your own infantry or other units. But there is a better choice in phase A, and that is the Feldgendarmerie. These guys not only look badass, they are pretty good in a sense. They pack a punch with 4 MP40s at 12 HE at close range. They have the H3 grenade, or the anti-tank grenade, with the ability to kill tanks, and then they have the 3 smoke grenades as well. So they match the utility of the Grenführer, but they go one step further with their high HE and AT capabilities. They also are 2-star veterancy, so they have a larger command radius, which means you're going to need less of them, and that is replicated in the card here. You can only get 2 of them, but still very, very useful to have and can defend themselves. So that is very useful indeed. Now, moving on to the last unit available in phase A, it is the Bewährungs. These guys are 25.15 strength squads, which is one of the, I think, the biggest infantry squads you can get in the game. They have 1 M38, they've got 13 Mosin Nagants, and they have 1 FM2429. Now, this actually makes their HE at both close range and long range pretty mediocre in the grand scheme of things. The only real good thing about the Bewährungs is that they are a very large strength squad, and there's a lot of men to get rid of, and that can make them really good in a defensive scenario. But like I always say, if you're playing to defend, you're never going to win, especially in Steel Division, where taking territory is probably the most important point of the game, regardless of how many dudes you lose. And these can be used to go aggressive and charge across the open, but they just don't quite have the same availability on each card as the Landeschützen. So Landeschützen, for that purpose, are more useful, since you can get more of them and they're cheaper. So that's why Bewährungs kind of fall off a little bit. Yes, you have the extra veterancy, but that's not really going to assist, again, with their purpose. Their purpose is to just sort of be a wall of men, and the cheaper you can get them, the better, which is why Landeschützen are favoured in phase A. I still bring them in, again, just to sort of, maybe a good idea for the Bewährungs would be if you're sort of concentrating somewhere with a push, so you've got loads of Landeschützen in front of all of your dudes, you could have the Bewährungs elsewhere where you're not being aggressive, and that's sort of the best sort of example I can give for the use of the Befehlungs in Phase A. So moving into Phase B, I do have the KM-Führer. These are the Marine Infantry, and these guys are interesting because usually I wouldn't take squads with no, or command squads with no veterancy if I can help it, because the command radius is really small. But in this case, the KM-Führer actually has quite decent HE close range and long range capabilities. So it's got 8 HE at close range with the Kar 98s and these MP28s. And then at long range, there is the 2 MG34s, which matches similar sort of power to Panzer Grenadiers. And that can be extremely useful. They also have 3 smoke grenades, so the utility is there. And, you know, accompanied with your infantry, these guys can pack a punch alongside them, which is beautiful. They can even cover your ROA as they advance, since the ROA don't have the longer range machine gun capability compared to the KM-Führer. So they sort of accompany them quite well, which is why I have them in the division. Some people like to bring in the KM Marine Infantry. These guys are 10 points, but they're disheartened. In my opinion, they are just like Bren Group on the side of the British, but worse. So yeah, not really something I would recommend, but I think sometimes people like to bring them in to spam them in Phase B. They can be useful for holding ground, like holding the front line forwards. I always talk about it, just having units there for the sake of having a unit there to make sure that the opponent doesn't get a salient. That's what these guys are useful for, but otherwise wouldn't recommend them. Also in Phase B, you can get Luftwaffenführer, but these guys, you only get one more availability of a no veterancy command squad. You get less men, less power than the KM-Führer. So in my opinion, the KM-Führer is still better for Phase B command infantry. You can get Luftwaffe Yeagers as well, but these guys kind of get outmatched by the ROA in Phase B. So that's why I wouldn't bring those in. And let's have a look at these ROA. So as you can see, what I bring in is the 3 cards of ROA that you have access to. And the main reason for this is you have 11 strength squads with 14 HE at close range, which is very difficult to deal with, especially if you compound that with 2-star veterancy from a command unit being nearby. So these guys can definitely pack a punch in the mid-game around town engagements at 100 meter range and also through forests. So that's what they can be useful for. Furthermore, they do have themselves a Faustpatron, which is really useful for obviously cleaning up like armored vehicles at 150 meter range. One thing I would be careful with these guys, don't let them get carried away at range with the DP or the Mosin Nagants. You definitely want to focus on trying to get them as close as you can to your enemy. So cover them with other forces, maybe use the smoke from your KM-Führer or Feldgendarme if you still have them alive to get them close, and that will enable them to be the most effective they can be with the PPSH, which is obviously an awesome submachine gun at close range. The other choice for Phase B is 4 MG42s, but with the fire support you get from elsewhere in this division, I don't feel like the MG42s are really worth an availability or activation slot in the Infantry Tab. Moving into Phase C, you can gain access to more command infantry. You can get Grenführer, 4 Grenführer on one card with the 3 smoke grenades. You can also get the Panzer Grenführer, 2-star. These guys actually come with a Panzerfaust, so relatively useful, but I prefer command infantry with smoke rather than I do with AT, because AT is less useful since you never should really be in AT range of enemy vehicles with a command unit, as you want to try and keep your command units alive as long as they can be to provide command radius to the rest of your troops. So in this case, the Panzer Grenführer with 2-star have a massive command radius, so you're never going to use that Panzerfaust, and therefore a smoke grenade would be much more useful for defensive maneuvers, maybe to cover your AT guns or something that they are standing nearby. So that's the Panzergrenadiers there as well. I don't actually bring either of those in. The Panzergrenadier with the 2-star veterancy, definitely a consideration because of the lack of command late game for the Festung Groß-Paris. But I just take 1 card of Landeschützen for more infantry availability, and I also bring in the Panzergrenadiers in the U304. Provides you with some pretty heavy late game infantry. They have the 2 MG42s with 9 HE at range. 1-star veterancy made to 2 makes them extremely effective, and this half-track's just a welcome 10-point armoured vehicle to support them wherever they need to go. So that's my choices for the Festung Groß-Paris infantry tab. And there is also, of course, the Panzergrenadiers down here with the 2-star veterancy, which are quite nice. 3-star Panzergrenadiers are great, but they lack the Panzerfaust that the Panzergrenadiers in the half-tracks have. So just bear that in mind. Let's move on to the tank tab. So the tank tab, again, is a very interesting tab for the Festung Groß-Paris. There's a lot of different units here. So let's start off in Phase A. I take a card of the Panzer 39 Hitches. These guys are useful for taking on enemy light armoured vehicles, as well as providing close range fire support for infantry, especially things like Landeschützen. They have the 8 HE on their Mach 31 machine gun, and that can definitely come in handy for pushing sort of limited defense or limited defenses in certain areas. So if you use your recon and you spot there isn't really an AT gun there, but there's nothing really to take care of armor, then a Panzer 39 is a very affordable choice to help your infantry advance against theirs, where theirs would otherwise be entrenched. So that's a really good use for the Panzer 39. They're also great at delaying in areas where you may not be pushing on the map. So that's another thing to consider using them for. Now the main difference here between the Panzer 39 and the Panzer 35 is that the Panzer 35, it has more armor in general, but less AP on the main gun. It's also slower, the Panzer 35, so bear that in mind. I prefer to have the extra mobility on the Panzer 39 as well as the extra AP for just that chance of getting a few more armored kills early on against those light armored vehicles. Now also in Phase A you do have access to the Panzer 40R command tank, and considering the low availability of infantry command in Phase A, Panzer 40 with command radius is actually quite a nice addition. 65 points, comes in with that 1-star command radius, which is a little bit bigger than normal. It has 5 front armor and 4 side armor similar to the Panzer 35, but it doesn't lack the crushing speed that the Panzer 35 has. So it has a 23 km/h speed rather than the 15 km/h speed, which is a big difference, and definitely makes it a little bit more mobile. The other good thing about the Panzer 40 is it does have the 5 AP plus the 5 armor rather than just the 5 AP and 4 front armor. So it's a relatively useful tank, and I would generally bring these in before I bring in the Panzer 39s, but considering how cheap they are, you can often get in quite a few of these before you move into Phase B. Now the other choices you can get in Phase I are the Befell Panzer 35. This thing is a little bit better at taking on things like Stuarts and like tanks. So Panzer 40s are good against, say, Humber Mark 3s and half-tracks in general. Whereas if you're going up against Stuarts, then a Panzer 3 would probably be a better choice because you do have the armor necessary to take those frontal engagements with those sort of tanks. Anything heavier than a Stuart you may struggle with, but the Befell Panzer 3 still is a decent infantry assisting tank that allows you to help them to push, because at close range the Panzer 3 with the 2 machine guns can actually pin down enemy forces very quickly. It's also relatively quick for a tank. It's 35 km/h speed. Now finally in Phase A you do also have access to the Panzer B2, and for those of you who know me well, it is a tank that I like to use very often. I think it has amazing fire support capabilities, and that is evidenced of the 75mm howitzer they have on the front. It has the Mach 31 machine gun, and those combined provide you with 17 HE straight off the bat, and that's regardless of their main gun, which provides an extra 2 HE, and both the main gun and howitzer can fire at the same time. So it's just a brilliant tank for pinning down infantry very quickly in entrenched positions, and it can also pin down AT guns very quickly. You can also do the fire position trick with it, where you fire just short of an AT gun or just to left or right of an AT gun out of line of sight. And yeah, that's the beauty of the B2, so definitely something to take advantage of. Moving into phase B, I have a couple of the Befell Panzer 35Ss. Again, limited command infantry does force you to kind of bring in command tanks, and the Befell Panzer 35S is not actually too bad with its 7 AP. At close range can actually do quite a lot of damage against heavier tanks like Shermans. So don't underestimate these Befell Panzer 35s, they can be extremely useful. Sinks front armor, 4 side armor makes them hard to kill from light armor like Stuart's, and yeah, that's something again you can take advantage of them. Now you are going to want to assist these with a Panzer 4H. In my opinion, the Panzer 4H is definitely necessary. It's the strongest tank you're going to get in phase B. It has the automatic turret, so it's aims a lot quicker than say the Panzer 4J. You can't get the Panzer 4J in this division, but just a thought that you are getting the better variant, so something you can definitely take advantage of. And assisted by a Befell Panzer 35, you can keep it with the 2-star veterancy, which can be very useful indeed. Now you can get yourself a 2-star Stug in phase B as well, and honestly, I'm just not a general fan of the Stug 3s. I think that they definitely are easily outflanked, and in my playstyle, where I like to be relatively aggressive where I can, the Stug 3 doesn't really work for me. I find it takes too long to aim due to it being a self-propelled gun, and therefore kind of lacks in use. But either way, definitely a strong consideration. You could even swap it out with the Befell Panzer 35Ss there, and that would still be a strong tank tab for sure. So definitely consider bringing in the Stug 3 with the 2-star veterancy. There's also access to more more Panzer 35s. These aren't Befell Panzer 35s, but without any veterancy, all you're really getting is high availability, and you don't really want these in high availability in phase B, since you'll be outclassed by most things by then. And that's pretty much your phase B. Phase B is very light on armor, which is not great. So ideally, with your higher income in phase B, you want to be saving that for phase C tanks, which are definitely a big improvement. So moving into phase C, you do get access to Panther Ds with 2-star veterancy. These are actually really awesome tanks at max range. So at 1200 meter range on more open maps, the Panther Ds are perfect because their shortened, or well, increased aim time, I guess, doesn't affect them so much at range. Whereas at closer range, you'd probably want to rely on a Befell Panther or Panther G because they have the shortened aim time. So yeah, Panther Ds made 3-star can be like snipers at range. But when it comes to close range engagements, you want to rely on the Befell Panther or the Panther G that you can see I have in my division. Now, other choices for phase C are the Tigers. The Tigers, you can get 2 of them on 1 card, or you can get a 2-star Tiger E. But I've never been a massive fan of bringing in Tigers, since by at least phase C, they are definitely outclassed by things like Fireflies. So I'd much rather have a Befell Panther engaging a Firefly at max range than a Tiger E, regardless of how accurate or how much AP a Tiger E has for its cost. In my opinion, the extra 40 points is definitely worth it for a Panther, which is way more likely to bounce shots from a Firefly, for example. So that's my sort of late game logic for the Festung Groß-Paris in the tank tab. And that's pretty much your lot. Main recommendation, possible changes are the Stug 3 instead of the Befell Panzer 35s. But it just depends on how you work around your command units. Because if we go into the support tab now, you'll see that there is no command units available except from the Befell BMW R75, which is an absolute waste of an activation point since it is unarmored and it doesn't even have a machine gun. So it can't defend itself and you'll just be wanting to keep it in cover. Well, it could be killed by HE from a mortar shell or just a little bit of spray from a machine gun. So very unreliable command unit to have, and I just don't really recommend using them. The other things in Phase A though are much more interesting. We have the Panzer 1B. This is an awesome little tank for 30 points with 13 HE, your sort of prime infantry support tank. That was what it was designed for and is what it's well used for in Steel Division. So definitely have those available. The other things in Phase A are of course the IG-18s. I find these guys can be very useful, but lately with the shift towards artillery being used more often, IGs will get taken out by things like mortars very easily. Maybe some bombs from like a Spitfire or something. But then again, if they stay alive for a long time, they can inflict a lot of damage, which is the sort of trade-off that you make. They can kill light vehicles with their HE value, and they can kill off a lot of infantry very quickly. You can also get Flammenwerfers, but for 20 points in a 15-point Kubel MG, just not worth it. I wish they didn't come in with a Kubel MG, just no... like just a normal Kubel would be better, because then you might consider bringing them in to support maybe like Landersschützen early on in sort of forest engagements. But in this case, not worth it in my opinion. You can also bring in supply in Phase A, but I don't think supply is needed, at least not for resupplying ammunition. It might be worth having to fix up criticals, but I'm quite happy to wait to Phase B in this division, where you can get 2 on 1 card rather than just the 1. And artillery from Phase A in the Festung doesn't, like I said, need ammunition as much, since I think they have 50 rounds off the bat, which is quite a lot. And if you get through 50 rounds of ammunition in Phase A, then you're probably being very efficient with your artillery, but at the same time it will probably be almost Phase B by the time you've done so, so it shouldn't really matter. You can get Flam Panzer B2s in Phase B, but by Phase B, B2s are generally quite outclassed, so be wary of bringing in these. Also, this Napalm is great and all, but with superior sort of infantry micro, you can work around these very easily, since it's a hull-mounted napalm launcher, which basically means that the tank has to be facing forwards to use it, and you can still flank it with AT infantry very easily. So just bear that in mind. Moving on to the anti-tank tab, another, again, very interesting division tab. The Festung has a little bit of everything in pretty much most tabs, and that can make it very long to talk about. Let's move on into this one though. We have the 2 Panzer Shreks with 2-star veterancy in Phase A. I've got both cards of those, and I have definitely started to enjoy using Panzer Shreks a lot more. Watching some of the more competitive players use them has encouraged me to try and do the same sort of thing in making them pay off by picking off tanks. If a Panzer Shrek kills a tank, it generally pays itself off at least twice over, if not way more. So that makes them extremely cost efficient. You just got to make sure you start using them in the right positions, and that's something that you can learn over time, either by watching competitive replays or maybe watching my own videos as I start to use them more often. So yeah, feel free to bring these in your division. I've definitely started to rely on them a lot more than I rely on AT guns. especially AT guns in the Festung, since they don't have any veterancy and they are a little lackluster, especially these Pak 36s. At close range, they do have the 20 AP, but that's 300 meter range you require, and then they can use the rocket. But otherwise, you're relying on 5 AP at 1000 meter range, which is okay for picking off half tracks and stuff, but won't really do you much favors against any sort of light to medium armor. And there's also options for the Pak 38s, but again, they are generally outclassed by a lot of tanks these days in Phase A. So the only useful one would really be the 1-star veterancy, and since you only get one on a card, the availability just doesn't really make it worth it, especially when you can get instead Pak 40s in Phase A, which have the 1200 meter range with a 13 AP. So these definitely help you outclass a lot of early phase armor, and it's just very useful as a more reactive AT gun in Phase A, as opposed to bringing in Pak 38s initially. I think a bad habit a lot of people have got into in Steel Division is bringing AT guns in at the start of the game. It can sort of bite you a little bit if you don't, but in general I tend to see that people aren't super aggressive at the start, and if they are, your AT guns are probably dead anyway. So it's better off to bring them in more reactively, or just into places where you know you can take advantage of them later in the game rather than right at the start. And a Pak 40 is just really good for that. It can catch out a lot of tanks at long range. So that's the beauty of the Pak 40. Now the other choices for Phase A are the Panzer Yeagers. You can bring in either 2 at 1-star veterancy or 3 with no veterancy, or both if you choose, but in my opinion I've got the 2 with 1-star veterancy made 2-star. Can be quite useful for cleaning up light armored vehicles early on, and at close range can also do quite a lot of damage to medium armor early on, and with 2-star veterancy and 10 round per minute rate of fire, they can definitely do a lot of damage. So don't underestimate the Panzer Yeagers. They can definitely be very useful. So that's that. Moving into Phase B, I do have the Panzer Vernichtungs. One thing to be careful of with the Panzer Vernichtungs is they are a only good stealth squad, as opposed to a Panzerschreck, which is very good. So these Panzer Vernichtungs will be spotted a lot easier, but one thing that's good about the Panzer Vernichtungs is they have, of course, more strength, and that makes them an absolute menace in towns. So in town engagements and even forest engagements, these can be extremely useful for catching out fire support that is close by on the enemy side of things, and that 250 meter range will help you find those kills. And that's the beauty of the Panzer Vernichtungs. And the Panzerschrecks, they are more useful for the sort of open engagements, where you have them just in a random bush by the side of a road or something, and then they can catch out an enemy unit maybe multiple times, whereas Panzer Vernichtungs will never get away with that because it doesn't have the stealth to sit in those bushes. Also in Phase B, I have the S307 Pak. This is a 2-star Pak 40 mounted on the S307 chassis, and it's just really good at max range. It's like an absolute sniper with a 3-star veterancy with 6 accuracy, and can put a lot of pain onto a medium tanks with 1000 meter range, as well as things like M10s, for example, which have a lower armor value than is normal for a medium tank or tank destroyer, and you can take advantage of it with these S307 Paks and their accuracy. So that's what I like to use it for. I also bring myself in a card of the Pak 40s, again for the same reason as before, just really good solid AT, especially moving into Phase B as well. There is access to a Marder 1 with 1-star veterancy, but low availability on the card makes me, or puts me off bringing it in. Same with the Marder 3M that you can also choose instead of the Marder 1. Now the only difference here really is the speed between the two vehicles. The accuracy remains the same, the AP and HE remains the same on both vehicles. Yeah, the only difference is the speed. So if you were going to choose between the two, I would recommend the Marder 3. Yeah, it just gives you that little bit extra. Moving on to Phase C, the only choice you have is the Yeager Panzer, and at 3-star Veteran C, this thing can do quite a lot of damage. It does suffer against high armoured units, for example in the Scots with the 15th Infantry, which is like Churchill's 15 front armour, of course the 3rd Armoured as well with the Jumbos, but generally can kill pretty much everything else, so that's what this is really good for. Now moving into the anti-air tab. Now anti-air has significantly less units than the rest of the tabs we've gone through so far, maybe other than the recon tab, and I'm going to be taking the Flak 39 in Phase A. I think this is a very useful AA to have, and is probably the only one worth bringing in Phase A, because the only other choice is the SDKF Z10-4s with the 20mm autocannons, and everybody knows what pea shooters these are, so the Flak 39 is the only thing with any substance, and has the 1000 meter range as well, which stops bombing strikes from being effective from before they drop their bombs rather than afterwards. Moving into Phase B, I just have the 3 cards of Flak 36s at 2 availability apiece. Just generally pretty solid 1000 meter range anti-air. And I actually recently removed the fighters from my air tab for just more of these in AA, because they are more cost efficient for preventing enemy aircraft from making strikes, basically. You can get Flak M36s, but these are basically Flak 88s without the AP, so not really worth it, especially for the cost. So I would avoid bringing in the Flak M36s if you can help it. They don't really provide that great ground support compared to like an 88, and that's the beauty of an 88. In Phase Z, you can get the 88s with the 15 AP, but I think honestly these Flak 36s are just way more cost efficient than 88s, and 88s often become very large targets for artillery in the late game, so by then the 88s are generally not as useful as they used to be. Now moving into the artillery tab. This tab is not very filled out for me. I've only got 2 of the LEFH-16s in Phase A, and like I was saying when I was mentioning in the support tab, these don't really need resupplying very often since they have 50 shells. They have 15 HE at 1900 meter range in Phase A, which is really good for counter battery. They are good for taking out AT guns and stuff, or at least pinning them down. They have a strength of 8, which makes them difficult to get rid of. So yeah, just a really strong artillery unit for Phase A. You can also get 50mm mortars, but these suffer from the 700 meter range and low strength, but great for infantry fire support. And you can also get this BEO UE630, but nobody ever brings this in since it's smoke support instead of HE fire support. So it just brings down a barrage of smoke, and I don't think I've ever seen anyone use this properly. So I would avoid it if I were you. Now you can also get more LEFHs if you wanted to in Phase A, but that's all I've got room for in my division, and honestly I don't make use of much artillery in this division other than the ones that I have on the division, so I think I've got it tuned pretty well. Moving into Phase B, I do have the 2-star Hummel. This being 3-star makes it not only incredibly accurate, but relatively high rate of fire increase from the 3 rate of fire, in order to make it an absolute sniper at distance with the 2800 meter range. Great for counter battery, great for sort of killing things off very quickly. It does have 27 HE. It can help pin down enemy tanks behind tree lines and stuff, so that's the great thing about a Hummel. You can also bring in the BEO Panzer 250-118. This comes in with 173mm off map. Again, just kind of useful for pinning down things behind tree lines. Not going to have much lethality, but definitely pins down and forces units to fall back. And that's really all you're going to be using that for. But in my opinion, doesn't deserve a place in the division. And then furthermore, in Phase B, you just have more artillery available if you need it in the form of the LEFH-16s. Now finally, moving on to the air tab, this is where the controversy lies with the Festung Groß-Paris. As far as I am aware, the Ju-88s will be increased in price eventually, but for now they're sitting at 125 points, which is pretty good value for money. And these work well in 2v2s, 3v3s and 4v4s, where your teammates can help you cover them as they come in for mass bombing strikes. However, in like a 1v1 scenario, you're only going to ever really want to bring in like a couple of these, and they'll be more than enough to sort of help you force units to fall back and then take advantage of that with units you have on the ground. So Ju-188s I think are, well, when the DLC came out, they were very sort of overrated, and in sort of big team games they can be very obnoxious, but you only really need a couple of them to make them sort of strong, in my opinion. Like one bombing strike from one of the Ju-188s is enough to pin down like a Sherman, for example, and force it to fall back. And that's all you really need them for. They're just great for dislodging units from defensive positions. So that's the beauty of the Ju-188s. You can get a lot of them, and I stack quite a lot of them for team games, but otherwise don't rely on them too much, as it might leave you light on the ground, where you will therefore lose because of that. You can get Storches in Phase A. For this division, I don't think Storches are very useful, since you are a very slow moving division, but for divisions where you have more speed on your side, recon aircraft can be quite useful. The D520s are just very naff aircraft, and I've basically been experimenting recently without having any fighters whatsoever. But one thing that having at least one card of these D520s either in Phase A or B or even C is that they can work well with your anti-air to catch out enemy aircraft. So these will be the lethal units that actually shoot down enemy aircraft after your anti-air makes it fall back. And that's pretty much all the D520s are useful for. They can't maintain a dogfight. They will get shot down by other sort of aircraft without the intervention of AA. So that's, yeah, be careful using the D520s. They can just be a waste of points sometime. But yeah, for me, one Ju-188 in Phase A, again just for pinning down defensive units, 2 more in B, and then I get 4 more in C. And yeah, I'm generally quite light on my air tab compared to some people who love to spam the availability of the Ju-188s. Now, finishing off in the air tab, there is the ability to get the Storch with the Kargarat 600mm off-map strike. This is one 50 HE shell that just lands on a location and blows everything up, and it can be pretty good, but don't rely on it too much. One thing you gotta take note of is that the shell can land anywhere within the circle. Like the center of the shell strike can land anywhere in the circle. So always try and use a barrage if you can, where the target is as small as possible. So it doesn't so never use like emergency barrage or fire for effect. Always use barrage, so that you have the smallest target available. So it always hits basically on what you want it to hit. That's probably the biggest tip I have with the Kargarat. Yes, the strike will take longer to come in, but it's pretty important if you want to make the most out of the Kargarat. Also, try not to make it too obvious where you're putting it. Don't fly directly towards the target that you're trying to hit, because generally if a player's smart, they will just move all of their forces away from where they originally were and wait for the strike to come back and then come down and then move them back. So yeah, watch out for that. But anyway, that is everything. That is everything for the Festung Groß-Paris, and I left these guys till last because I was wondering if I'd be able to let my voice last long enough to get this done. There is so much to talk about in this division. Now, just to finish off, we may as well talk about how they play out a little bit. And in my opinion, I haven't really got around to working out a sort of significant strategy to make an advantage in Phase A, but it mainly comes around using Panzer trucks effectively, using the Puma effectively, and the B2 effectively, along with a spam of Landesschützen and fire support in the Panzer 1B if you're not up against AT units, and maybe use like the Ju-188 to pin down any forces that are defensive behind like a tree line or whatever that are getting in your way, and then pop them with your other units. This division can really come to life in Phase C if you keep some units or some income from Phase B. So if you start saving towards the end of Phase B, you can bring in a couple of Panthers and really make a strong push. One thing that's good about them in Phase B is that they can push through towns and forests very nicely with the ROA and the Panzervernichtung. So they have multiple uses throughout multiple phases, and it makes them great for team games, but not so much for Phase A. They lack a focus, I think, and or not so much for 1v1s, I mean. So because they lack a bit of focus. But yeah, great for team games. Can support all over the map. But yeah, just in general, a very interesting division. And I would say they really come to life in Phase B when they have a lot of the different units on the field at the same time. So yeah, that's just my look at the Festung Groß-Paris. Probably one of my least played DLC divisions from Battlegroup, but an interesting one nonetheless. And hopefully you guys have found my battle group overview interesting or useful. Let me know what you guys think of my choices in the comments and any differences you may have. I mean, there's going to be quite a lot of differences considering the amount of different units we've gone through today. But yeah, that's where I'm going to leave it. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Goodbye.